Welcome to Comp 4740, Intercultural Communication, Chapter 7, Nonverbal Codes and Cultural Space. As we explore this idea of cultural spaces, keep in mind that these are not necessarily literal places, although they can be. Let me clarify that with a couple of examples. A literal cultural space would be something like Waldo Stadium, where the WMU Broncos play football. That is a place where people engage in cultural interaction together. So in that case, it is a literal space. But we also have alumni all over the country and all over the world who might be watching that game on television. And all of those people might refer to themselves as Bronco Nation on game day. So there's a cultural event happening there that isn't necessarily tied to a single time and place. Another example of this might be a discussion thread or a chat room online where people come together for a specific time and to discuss a specific topic, but then they later will disperse. An example of that would be I had a colleague who did her dissertation on people's reactions to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and she based her work on a chat board online where people were talking about the 9/11 attacks. Those discussions are still out there in archive form on the internet. But at the time that people were in there and having the discussion, that was a cultural space. There was a cultural interaction happening there. But now that cultural space is no longer active. In a sense, it no longer exists. So as you can see, these could be literal places or figurative or metaphorical places. And cultural spaces are these places where people gather to engage in cultural interaction together. So think about some of the examples here. You might be familiar with Comic-Con, which is a conference of people who are interested in comic books and cartoons and superhero characters that get together in a conference on a yearly basis, but they're always meeting in a different city. So Comic-Con is a cultural space, but it isn't necessarily tied to a single literal space. The same with NCA, which is the National Communication Association. We have a conference every year in a different city, but NCA has a culture of its own, no matter where it's taking place that year. Here's some other ones: NASCAR culture, rodeo culture, church culture. These are sometimes taking place in an individual location and other times are taking place in different places every year or among people who are very spread out. But all of these are cultural spaces because they are places where people interact and engage in culture. If you're not familiar with Comic-Con, here are a few pictures from the event so you can see people doing some cosplay and dressing up as their favorite superhero characters. These are a little dated. You see the Batman and Robin, the old school Batman and Robin here. You see Princess Leia and Chewbacca, and you see the Power Rangers. And just an example of what makes a cultural space. Sometimes cultural spaces have explicit social rules. So here are some Comic-Con rules. You don't take pictures without permission. You don't sneak pictures. You don't touch other people's costumes or props. And you don't insult someone's costume. So these are part of a list of explicit social rules that they have for Comic-Con. So these rules drive the culture of that space, wherever it's taking place. I spoke a moment ago about the NCA convention, or the National Communication Association, which is a association of communication professionals, mostly college professors and graduate students, who meet once a year, and there's usually about 5,000 people there. We meet at in a different city at a different hotel every year. We've met at Disney World in Orlando. We've done Washington, D.C. You can see we were in Las Vegas, Nevada in 2015. So the convention moves around, but it is still a cultural space where there's a certain etiquette to it. There's certain procedures that happen. You get there, you check in, you get your name tag and your schedule. And over time, we learn what proper behavior is and what the social scripts for it are. In the lower left-hand corner there, you see a picture of me with 3 of my grad school buddies. Those ladies were in my PhD program with me. You see these red name tags we're wearing around our neck. That's part of the culture of that conference, that you wear the name tags. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see the main exhibition hall where when you enter the conference, you walk through those doors and under that banner, "Welcome to the NCA Annual Convention." So again, it's a cultural space no matter where it's taking place. Here are some more cultural spaces to think about. What is home? You might move house many times in your lifetime, but each place that you stay in and eat in and sleep in and have family or friends in, you refer to as home. So home is a cultural space that might change in physical form, but not in metaphorical form. What about neighborhood? What are the parameters of your neighborhood? Do those parameters expand and contract over time? If you say that person lives in my neighborhood, what exactly do you mean? I saw a news item after a hurricane. There was a church that had been just swept away. There was nothing left but the cement slab that it was built on, and they showed that the people who attended that church had folding chairs on that cement slab, and the preacher was there, and they were having service on Sunday because the church building is not the church, the people coming together, that cultural group and that cultural interaction was the church, whether or not they were meeting within those walls that they were used to having around them. And then on the internet, some spaces only exist while they are in use. You might be in a class where a classmate creates a GroupMe page for a project group in your class, and you go there and you interact with each other around that project that you're doing. And then when that class is over with, you're going to abandon that space. So that space only existed in a particular time among particular people. So cultural space can be both very literal and definite and very abstract and metaphorical. Expectancy violation theory is a social theory that describes how we react when people do things we don't expect them to do, when they violate our cultural norms. Each of those cultural groups and cultural spaces we talked about has a set of norms for behavior. They might be implicit and or explicit norms, but people who are members of a particular group usually understand what the scripts are and how they're supposed to behave. So when somebody violates those norms or violates those expectations, it draws our attention. We say that person is an outsider in some way, and we assign meaning to their violation. If this person misbehaved, we might say, oh, well, maybe he doesn't know any better, or we might say, wow, she's really rude. Right? We're going to attribute some meaning to this person's violation of our expectations of them. And in assigning that meaning, we consider both the context and the valence of the violation. Now, context is the situation in which it happens, And valence is how bad it is. What is the degree of badness, we might say. So for example, take a person in a swimsuit. If that person is walking their dog down the sidewalk, well, that's kind of an expectancy violation. In our culture, most people don't walk their dog wearing a swimsuit, but it's not that bad. It's not a terrible violation of social norms. We might consider it a little odd. We assign meaning to it. We might think, oh, well, that person must be really hot today, or they're planning to go to the pool or something like that, right? Now, imagine that that person in the swimsuit shows up at a business meeting. The context is a business meeting. The valence of the violation is going to be much more serious. The badness of the violation is going to be considered much more serious by the people in that room who are all wearing business suits. And they're going to assign a meaning to this violation. They're going to make an assumption about this person and their motive based on the way they're behaving. So let's look at this list of different behaviors and try to apply expectancy violation theory to some of them. Now, any of these behaviors could be considered a violation of social norms in particular situations and not in others. So on the left-hand side near the bottom, we have talking during a movie. That would normally be a violation of social norms, right? We know that once the lights go down and the movie starts, we're supposed to be quiet. And if somebody is talking, we're going to find it annoying, right? We might assume that they're rude. But what is the reason why they're talking? So talking is a violation and it's drawn our attention, but how bad is it? Well, it's going to depend. If they're talking to their friend about what they want to have for dinner later, then yeah, that's not a very nice thing to do. But if they're talking because they're warning people that they see a fire in the corner and we need to leave the movie theater, then the talking would be acceptable. It would actually be a positive thing. So again, it depends on the context and the valence. In the right-hand column, let's look at about halfway down, cutting in line. Again, cutting in line is considered to be a violation of social norms in our culture. It's not nice. You're supposed to queue up in an orderly fashion and wait your turn. That's what we all have been taught. But say somebody cuts in line. Okay, that's a violation. It has drawn your attention. But how bad is it? Well, again, it's going to depend on the context in which it takes place, right? So if it's a super, super long line and you've been waiting for hours and somebody just marches up to the front of the line and elbows their way in very rudely, that's going to have a different valence for you than if somebody is injured or has an emergency and has to get to the front of the line. So that context is going to have a big effect on how you interpret that behavior. As we engage in communication across culture and interact with each other in these cultural spaces, some of our communication is verbal, but there are a lot of nonverbal elements as well that are ripe for misunderstanding. So we're going to look at a whole list of nonverbal communication types here that can be misconstrued in intercultural settings. We'll take these one at a time on the slides that follow, but they are listed here. The first one is proxemics. Think of the word proximity. This is how close you get to people. Gestures, or the way we move our arms and hands. Eye contact. How much of it is appropriate? How direct is it? Paralinguistics, which are elements of the spoken word besides the words themselves. So things like pitch or volume of your voice, and even silence and how you use silence is something we'll explore. Chronemics, or the use of time and how you manage time within a particular cultural group. Touch and artifacts. All of these elements of nonverbal communication are important parts of the communication process that we'll look at. So let's start with the way we use space and how that communicates to other people. It communicates how we feel about them, what our relationship with them is. It can communicate aggression or timidity, depending on how close we get to other people. And getting close to somebody can be a violation of cultural norms, or it can be something that is expected. So the way we manage space has a message inherent in it. A sociologist named Hall came up with a series of spatial zones that each have a particular meaning. So let's examine those. The first spatial zone is intimate distance. This is 0 to 1.5 feet. So from being right up against you to about 18 inches out. That's what we call intimate distance or intimate space. Now, it's close enough to kiss somebody, right? It's close enough to smell their breath when they're talking. So think about who you allow into your intimate distance. Personal distance is 1.5 to 4 feet, okay? This is the distance that we usually interact with friends in. So we normally would stand 1.5 to 4 feet apart from someone if we're having a personal conversation. Now let's just look at these first two zones first, intimate distance and personal distance, and think about what happens when someone violates our expectations. You might have a friend that you normally interact with at a personal distance of, say, 3 feet. What happens when that friend steps into your intimate distance? It might be welcome to you. It might be unwelcome. It might be a friend that you've been hoping you'll become romantic with, and they come into your intimate zone, so you think, well, maybe they're going to kiss you. Or it might be someone who's very angry with you, and they're getting into your intimate space to yell right in your face. So they might be violating an expectation or a norm by crossing that imaginary line between personal distance and intimate distance. Let's look at the third one, social distance, 4 to 12 feet. This is the distance from which we usually interact with people who are not close friends. Strangers, for example, we would interact with at this distance. Think about if you're staying in a hotel and you ask the hotel maid, could I have some extra towels in my room? You're probably going to be standing, say, 6 feet away from that hotel maid. That's an example of social distance. When people put their beach blankets down on the shore, they tend to space them at least 4 feet apart, 4 to 12 feet apart. So this is a zone for strangers. And you normally wouldn't cross that line of 4 feet into the personal distance unless you're invited to. Public distance, 12 feet or more. This is usually seen in situations where you have a lecturer on a stage or a person giving a talk and hundreds of people crowded around to listen. That's the 12 or more feet. So think about if you went to listen to a political candidate talk and you're at least 12 feet away from them, but imagine if that person came into your social distance of 4 to 12 feet. Well, maybe they're starting to mingle with the crowd, right? Then maybe they come into the personal distance zone and ask you a question. Where are you from? And what did you think of my speech? They might even step into the intimate distance zone to shake your hand and thank you for coming. So we use these different spatial zones to communicate what our relationships are, what our intentions are toward another person, and we have implicit cultural rules that tell us which of these is appropriate with which people and which relationships. Let's look at a series of pictures to illustrate how space can communicate. Looking at this first picture, we see three people sitting on a bench, but the way they're spaced and their postures can tell us something about their relationships. So the two women on the right are within personal distance of each other. They're within that 4 foot, like 2 to 4 foot range. So looking at them, their proximity communicates to us that they at least know one another. They're probably friends. When we look at the man on the left, who's way at the other end of the bench, he's in a social distance zone. So he could talk to them, he could turn his head and say something to them, but he is spaced farther away. And we assume by his spacing and posture that he probably doesn't know these women. It looks like it's a public park, and he's following the social norm of not sitting close to somebody that you don't know. We would assume that that's the story we would tell based on the picture we see here. The real story might be entirely different. He could be their friend, but he's angry with them, so he created that space to communicate his anger. So when we look at this picture, we can see that these two people are seated within personal distance of one another. Their bodies are turned toward each other. They're making eye contact. So based on their spatial zones and postures, we would assume that at least they're pleased to be interacting with one another. They appear to be friendly with one another. The two people in this picture are situated in a similar way to the ones in the last picture, but there are some differences we can interpret. We have two people sitting on a bench, and they are within personal distance of one another. But based on certain body language cues and facial expressions, we can maybe assume that they're not as friendly or happy to be with each other as the couple in the last picture is. When you look at the man on the right and the way he is sitting, and then you look at the man on the left, he's leaning in, he has his hand on the other man's shoulder, so he has crossed into the intimate space of the man on the right. Does the man on the right appreciate that? Has he invited this guy into his intimate space? It's hard to tell, but judging by his facial expression and the way he's sitting, we might interpret that that is an unwelcome violation of his intimate space. Gestures are a kind of nonverbal communication that are just ripe for misunderstanding between cultures, because a lot of the things that we do with our hands and our fingers have different meanings in other cultures, especially international cultures. And here's an example. When President George W. Bush was inaugurated, the Texas Longhorns marching band appeared in his inaugural parade, and he and his family were making this gesture that you see Jenna Bush making here, which means hook 'em horns. It's a fan thing that Texas Longhorns supporters will do at games and things like that. So that was the meaning behind the gesture. But in Norway, that particular hand gesture is a salute to Satan. It means you're in league with Satan if you make that gesture. So the newspapers in Norway printed pictures of the Bush family, not only Jenna here, but the other members of the Bush family were also making this gesture, and the newspaper story speculated that they were in league with Satan because they were making that gesture. So one of the challenges of communicating accurately across, especially across international cultures, is to understand what different gestures mean in different contexts and to make sure you are not making gestures that might be interpreted in a different way than you want to. For example, when we put our hand up in the OK sign where we touch our index finger and thumb together to make a circle, in our culture that means OK, or the thumbs up signal. Those are positive gestures in our culture, but they can have vulgar meanings in other cultures. So if you're ever in a different country, it's wise to be careful of the things that you're doing with your hands if you don't want to be misunderstood. There are a number of different kinds of gestures that we might make with our hands and arms. The first is emblems. An emblem is a gesture that could translate into words. The best example of this I can think of is when you give someone the finger. We all know what word goes with that gesture. So you don't need to hear the word. You know just from the gesture what it means, or the OK symbol that you make with your fingers. That translates into words. Next, we have illustrators. Illustrators are gestures that go with a verbal message and clarify it. So, for example, if I say the fish was 6 inches long and I hold my hands 6 inches apart, that would be an illustrator. Or if I say turn right and I point to the right, that would be an illustrator. It's a gesture that goes with and adds to the verbal message. Affect displays communicate emotion. Think of the word affection. An affect display might be if you blow someone a kiss or you put your hands over your heart, as a way of saying, I love you. Maybe you open your arms for a hug. Regulators are gestures that control the flow of conversation. So, for example, in class, you raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak, and the professor might point at you to indicate that you may speak. Those kind of gestures are regulators. Finally, adapters are gestures that satisfy a personal need. So you might scratch your head. That would be an adapter. You have a personal need, you have an itchy scalp, you scratch your head. It is a gesture type of movement. The problem with those kind of movements, again, is that they can be misinterpreted or they can be appropriate in some situations and not others. For example, think of picking your nose. That would be an adapter. Depending on where and when you do it, we're going back to expectancy violation now in the context and valence, it could be interpreted very negatively. So we usually try to avoid too many adapters when we are in the company of others. Another form of nonverbal communication that is fraught with meaning is eye contact. What does eye contact mean? What does it mean when someone avoids eye contact or when they make very direct, intense eye contact? How do we interpret those? Well, cultural context plays a big part, depending on whether or not eye contact is acceptable and expected in a particular culture. Now, in US culture, we tend to believe that if someone avoids eye contact, they might be insincere, they might be lying to us, things like that. That's how we interpret the avoidance of eye contact. We interpret eye contact to be a positive thing, so we tell someone when they're going for a job interview, make sure you make eye contact with the person when you shake hands, right? So it's a positive thing. But what about too much eye contact or very intense, prolonged eye contact? What do we think that means? Well, again, it depends on the context and it depends on the relationship between the people. You might see it as a challenge or as an exercise of power, someone staring you down, as we say. What about eye contact between genders? What about eye contact between friends versus lovers? What does that entail? And what does it mean? How do we interpret it? What about eye contact between social classes? For example, if someone is your boss and they're making very direct and intense eye contact with you, could that have a different meaning than when your friend makes eye contact with you? Paralinguistics are aspects of voice that convey meaning. So this is verbal communication, but it's the stuff other than the words. Okay, so setting the words aside, paralinguistics are the pitch and inflection of the voice, the volume of the voice, the rate at which someone is speaking, and things like that, and the meanings that we attach to those. So let's look at some of these. For example, pitch or inflection. If a voice is pitched high or low, we sometimes attach meanings to that. If we're very nervous, sometimes our voices go into a higher pitch. So that could convey a meaning of fear. Even if the words you're saying are, I'm not afraid, the inflection of your voice might indicate fear. The volume of your voice, what volume is appropriate for a certain situation? Do you shout or do you whisper? That can convey that you understand the social norm or you don't. What about the rate of speech? We all know people who speak way too fast. I tend to slow my rate down when I am teaching. Like the talking I'm doing now, I'm speaking at a much slower pace than I would if we were just having a friendly conversation. Filler words. Does the person and a lot? And what meaning might we attach to that? Sometimes we think if a person says or a lot, that means that they are unprepared to give their speech or to talk about something. It might indicate that they're thinking. It might indicate that they're nervous. We attach different meanings to that. This is one of the reasons why public speaking instructors usually spend some time on filler words and encouraging students to try to eliminate filler words from their speech. I've worked for years to try to get rid of them, and they still creep in once in a while, but I've gotten a lot better at not using them, but it is a conscious effort. Articulation. How carefully do you pronounce words? And do you have any regional or ethnic pronunciations that come through that can cause people to judge where you're from or what the meaning of your message is? Just for example, there is something in Midwestern speech called the glottal consonant. And this happens when people pronounce words like mitten, M-I-T-T-E-N, as mitten. That's called a glottal consonant. Or the word important, people will say important. Again, that's a glottal consonant, and it's a regional thing, but it can sound inarticulate to some audiences. So if you are in the habit of using the glottal consonant, it's almost a slang type of speech, and it is attached to the Midwest. So be aware if you have that tendency that it can be interpreted as inarticulateness. An accent, a regional accent, that's a form of paralinguistics. So there are the words you speak, and then there is the accent in which you speak them. Having grown up all over Michigan, but spent a lot of time in northern Michigan, and having Canadian relatives, when I was going to graduate school down in Ohio, a lot of them thought I was Canadian, so apparently they think I had that kind of an accent. And then silence. Silence is actually a form of speech. Silence as speech. That's kind of a funny thing to think about, but it is a paralinguistic. Have you ever given someone the silent treatment? Well, that silence was meant to convey a meaning, that I'm angry with you, that I'm not speaking to you, that you're not welcome here? Or has somebody ever sent you a text message and you have delayed texting them back saying, let him stew for a while, I'll return his text tomorrow? You were using silence as speech when you did that. You were using silence to convey a message. Chronemics is about how we use time to communicate. So we say that monochronic cultures, think mono means one, so monochronic cultures are very strict about time. The U.S. is considered a monochronic culture. We expect you to be punctual. If we say the meeting starts at 4 o'clock, if you walk in at 4:10, you're late. That kind of thinking. And monochronic cultures tend to see time as a commodity. It's a precious and valuable thing. We even say in our culture that time is money. And we use all these money metaphors for time. Like we say we save it, we spend it, we invest it. So we're a very monochronic culture here in the U.S. Polychronic cultures, think poly means many, right? More than one. Polychronic cultures take a more holistic approach to time, a more laissez-faire approach to time. Many South American and European cultures are polychronic, where they don't emphasize that kind of punctuality and strictness about time as we do. These type of cultures are more apt to spend more time at the dinner table together, to consider a conversation with a friend very important, no matter how long it takes. So think about what these orientations to time say about what we value and what they say about power. Because, for example, if you go to the office of someone who is more powerful than you to have a meeting with them, and you have to wait, let's say you have to wait 15 minutes, because they're in a position of power over you, they can use time that way to exert their power and make you wait. And you might feel that you have no right to speak up about it, even though they might be wasting your time. So there is a power difference in the way we use time as well. Touch is another form of nonverbal communication, and the study of how we use touch to communicate is called haptics. And we're going to look at 5 different kinds of touch and the different things that they might communicate. I'm going to do the first 2 as a pair: affectionate touch and caregiving touch. They sound similar, but they have different definitions. Affectionate touch is touch that's intended to show love or liking. So if I give you a hug, that's an affectionate touch. If I hold your hand, that's an affectionate touch. Affectionate touch is motivated by the desire to show affection. Okay? Caregiving touch is a little different. Caregiving touch is when someone touches you in the act of administering some kind of care to you. So for example, you go to the hairdresser to get your hair cut and they shampoo your hair and the scalp massage feels really good. That's caregiving touch. It's not motivated by affection. It's being done in the process of administering some sort of physical care to you. Or if you go to the doctor and you say, my elbow hurts, and so the doctor is touching and rubbing your elbow and moving your arm in different directions, that's caregiving touch. Again, it's not motivated by love for you. It's being done in the process of administering some sort of care to you. The next pair kind of go together too, because they sound similar, but they're different. Power and control touch versus aggressive touch. Let's take these one at a time and we'll compare and contrast them. Power and control touch is when you touch somebody in an effort to control what they're doing. So if you're about to walk away from me and I say, wait, and I grab your arm, that's power and control touch. Or if a little kid is acting up and you get down on your knees and you put your hands on his shoulders and you say, Jimmy, listen to me. That's power and control touch. It's being used to control the behavior or control the situation with someone else. Aggressive touch is touch that's motivated by a desire to hurt somebody. So if I slap you across the face, that's aggressive touch. If I punch you in the arm intending to hurt you, that's aggressive touch. So think about the difference here. Power and control touch might be as simple as grabbing your hand as you turn away from me and saying, wait a second, I'll come with you, right? I'm just trying to control your movement. Whereas aggressive touch is motivated by the desire to hurt somebody. And then the final one, ritualistic touch, is the way we touch each other in greeting. Now, this could be a handshake. This could be a kiss on the cheek, depending on the cultural norms. You might not normally touch this person, but if they offer their hand, you shake their hand. It's part of our cultural norms to touch one another in that way. Artifacts are the objects and visual features in an environment and what those communicate to us. So think about what you observe in a person's space and what that tells you. For example, office decor. You've probably been to professors' offices and seen that some of us are working in a cave of books and papers and stuff piled to the ceiling, and we have to clear off a chair for you to sit down on, whereas other people might have nothing on their desk except the one piece of paper that they're working on. We make assumptions about people based on those things we visually observe. Maybe someone has a lot of pictures of their pets or their kids or something like that. We come to conclusions that speaks to us, the things we see. Seating arrangement is another artifact. Think about how a lecture hall is set up with rows of chairs facing forward. There's often an elevated stage where the speaker stands. That space is designed to draw your attention to the person at the front of the room and to discourage you from communicating to the people around you. It's meant to force you into that. So if you walk into a lecture hall, you're expecting a different kind of experience than if you walk into a room where the seating is arranged in pods, for example. And then color. Color can communicate richness and wealth. It can communicate cheapness. It can communicate positive or negative emotions. All kinds of things are associated with color, which we'll look at in just a second here. What do the colors that these painters are applying to this house convey to you? What do we associate rainbows with in our current culture? Think about that. Usually with the LGBTQ plus community and support of that community. So when you look at this house, you might interpret the message that the people who live here support that community. What do the artifacts in this room convey to you? We see a cross, a very narrow bed, a table and bench. It looks pretty plain and simple. There is a religious statue in the corner, so this might be the room of a nun, for example. Just by looking at the decor, the furniture, the colors, we make that assumption, and this space communicates something to us about its inhabitant. By contrast, you look at this space and what does it tell you? What does it say to you about its inhabitant? We have lots of natural light, we have bright colors, we have white carpeting. Do you think these people have kids if they have white carpeting? That's an interesting thing to consider. But what kind of people are they who occupy this space? What would you assume just based on the decor and the color choices? Here's a very different space. It's dark. The furniture is very dark. To me, this looks like it's in a basement. So could it be a theater viewing room type place? Is it what we call a man cave? The decoration and color choices do tend to be more masculine than feminine. So think about who would you expect to inhabit this space based on what it looks like. I really like this one a lot. We have yellow and orange as our brightest colors in this environment. We have a black and white tile floor. We have this part of a person apparently sticking up into the ceiling. It looks like a restaurant because on the tables we see glassware and napkins and things like that. What kind of a restaurant do you think it is? What kind of people interact in this space? What kind of a cultural space is this based on the colors, the layout, the furniture choices, and the atmosphere? And then what do you assume about this space? Well, based on the TVs on the wall that all appear to be playing sports, most of us are familiar with what a sports bar looks like on the inside, so I think we'd be quick to label this with that title. What kind of people inhabit this space? What are they doing? How are they interacting with one another? If you entered this space, what kind of experience would you expect to have here, just based on what you see? And that's it for Chapter 7, Nonverbal Codes and Cultural Space. As always, read the chapter carefully, contact your instructor if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next one.